Welcome, everybody. I'm Becky King. I'm joined by...
I'm Dana Keep.
And I'm Christina Brighter.
And we're all with Career Education. And as you know, WAMF is co-sponsoring tonight's session, this afternoon's session. Thank you, Juliana, for setting this all up. Today, some of you were with us for the resume workshop we did a couple weeks ago. And you'll be happy to know that some of that carries into your interview, because we advised you to tell stories in your resume about what you have accomplished. And we're going to take that into the interview setting now.
All right, great. I'm going to share my screen. And I will begin. So I'm going to kick us off with talking about what you do. Oops, why is that doing that? Sorry, I went through. I'm going to begin by talking about what you do before you even get to the interview, and perhaps what will likely be your first question. And then the three of us will talk about other different kinds of questions. And then Becky will wrap it up with what you do after the interview. So very clear format here: before, during, and after. Not very tricky. So congratulations, you got an interview, you're so excited. What do you do to prepare? Because you know that if you are well prepared, you will not only do better in the interview, but you will be a lot more confident. And the last thing that you say to yourself before you go into the interview will be, I'm excited, I'm ready for this, I did a good job preparing. And so that's where we want to get you. So importantly, and I know you know many of these things, but just to be thorough in our presentation, we want to review the whole package. You want to research the people and the company that you will be interviewing with. So the people, you would look up their bios on the company website, you would look them up on LinkedIn, you would see if there are any articles written about them. You don't want to just pick one avenue, but try to see if you can find information about the leadership of the company and the people with whom you'll be interviewing. And if they're not the leadership of the company, that might be a little bit tougher, but still, you want to understand who is leading the company, and then also try to learn about the people with whom you'll be meeting, because it may turn out that you have something in common with them. You may have a hometown in common, or even a high school or something like that. And then how do you research the company? Well, obviously, you know the website inside and out. Obviously, you've looked up recent articles or blog posts about the company. And then if you have enough lead time, you'll want to reach out to some perhaps Wellesley alums who had an internship there before, or Wellesley alums who work there. And in reaching out to them, you can say, I'm very excited. I have an interview coming up with Bank of America, and I would love to have a chance to talk with you to learn more about what it's like to work there, or to learn more about the bank's culture, or to learn more about your experience there, whatever it might be. So reaching out to anyone in your LinkedIn network, any Wellesley alums through the Hive or through LinkedIn can be really helpful. And that information goes into your basic understanding of the company. I just want to make one point there. I have heard quite often business school students actually answer the question about why you want to work at a certain company. They'll say, because, well, my friend works there and she likes it. But so that's not a good answer, and we'll get to that one. But when you're talking to people, you want to understand why they love it, not just that they love it, but why they like it. And that will help you in preparing some of the answers to the questions further down the road. So that's researching the people you're going to meet, the leadership of the company, and the company itself from various angles is a great way to begin. And as you're doing that research along the way, you might come up with questions that you have about the company. You might note, you put a big emphasis on XYZ in your website. I would love to hear more about that. That might be one of your questions that you would have at the end of the interview. Okay. Assuming that all of these interviews for the near future are going to be virtual, Obviously, you want to give some thought to your background. We were just talking with Juliana. It's better not to have a bed in your background. If you're going to have one, at least make it. But hopefully you don't have to have a bed in your background. You want something that's not too busy. You don't want the door halfway open to your closet. You want closed doors, clear shelves. I mean, you can have books on shelves and things, but you want the focus to be on what you're saying. You don't want the focus to be on your background. You don't want the focus to be on your clothing. It's just, you want the emphasis to be on what's coming out of your mouth. So if you have questions about that, you're welcome to test it with any of us or with a friend and just say, hey, can I show you this background? How does it look to you? Is it busy? Is it clear? And then thinking about your clothing, again, for most of these kinds of interviews, it will be, business, professional, probably a jacket with a shirt underneath, or either a blouse or a shell kind of shirt underneath. Again, not a lot of busyness, not a lot of patterns, minimal jewelry, whatever makeup you normally wear, but don't overdo it. And just make sure that you look like yourself and you look professional and you brushed your hair, and you don't have to worry if you're still wearing your sweatpants. That's an unusual factor, but that's the truth of the matter these days. And finally, the fact that the interviews will be virtual does allow you to have some notes, but this can be a little bit dangerous if you go overboard. So I would never recommend that you have paragraphs taped to your wall that you're going to read. That's too much. Around your computer, you could have bullet points, you could have keywords, you could have a list of the 3 or 5 stories that you want to remember in case you have a moment of freezing up. But you certainly don't want to be talking to somebody and then looking over here and saying, well, yes, I did have an experience once where I showed some great leadership, because, that would just not really help you out at all. You want to appear that you're having a conversation as best we can on Zoom. But if putting a few notes around you helps you, just in terms of, it's like a security blanket. If I forget for a second, I can just glance at that and then I know. All right, so I guess we'll save all our questions for the end. Or does anyone immediately have a question about preparation before I move on to actually in the interview and the first question you're likely to get?
Or we can just have questions pop into the chat and we'll make sure to get to them that way.
Okay. All right. Okay. Very often opening questions at an interview are like this. Tell me about yourself. Well, what brings you to this interview? Or walk me through your resume. And these are often questions that people don't practice a lot because you're thinking, okay, tell me about yourself. Well, who's better expert on myself than me? I should be able to do that, right? That's not too tricky. But there are a couple of common errors here that I think a little practice can help you with. Well, the first thing that I hear very often is people go on too long. It's a bit rambling, and it's just sort of a chronological mishmash rather than having some specific points of transition or decision in it. So for example, if someone says, tell me about yourself, you do not want to begin with, well, I went to kindergarten in Ohio and we lived there for 3 years, and that's way too much. Okay. So I'm going a little extreme to show you the exaggerated wrong way to do it. I think you can practice this, you can record it, and in and around 2 minutes is about what you want to shoot for. And a way to help you organize it is that you want to think about your decision points or your transition points. So decision points are why I chose to go to Wellesley College, why I chose to major in anthropology. Just transition points might be, I grew up abroad and we moved to the United States when I was 13, something big that's about yourself if you want people to know, for example, that you grew up in a different country or had a very international background and traveled a lot. So think of your decision and transition points. And as you get older in life, the decision points will also be why you took or left a certain job, but that doesn't really apply yet to most of you. It could be why I chose this particular internship or why I chose to be involved in this particular club. But focusing on decision and transition points. And then the final important piece is that you're not just saying, you know, I chose to major in math, but I majored in math because I love quantitative problems, or I'm investigating finance because I really love to understand how the numbers tell the story. So you want to add to your story of tell me about yourself the parts about you that make it interesting, that make it unique. You know, why is this interesting to you? Where did your interest come from? How did your enthusiasm evolve? Was there an experience that you had that really sparked your interest in whatever it might be, in asset management? Have you, you know, was it a conversation that you had somewhere? So many of you could, you know, accomplish the requirements of a certain job, but the people who are interviewing you are going to want to know, why do you want to accomplish those? Like, what is it about it that's interesting to you? They just don't want to know if you can do it. They want to know if you can do it and why you're excited about doing it. So that's a bit on the opening questions. These are the most common ones. Usually people open with something like that, maybe a little small talk, but hopefully that's helpful. Practice, record it. The one thing that I think we're probably going to say throughout this workshop is to practice out loud. That is the most important thing, because practicing in your head is very different from saying it out loud. So I recommend that highly. And the next group of questions, I will turn it over to Becky.
I couldn't agree more about the having to practice out loud, and also assessing what it is that really makes you interested in finance, investment banking, asset management, and all of, you know, the different aspects of companies, money management, client relations, and things like that, because those are the kinds of questions they're going to be getting at, and hoping that you've thought through, and hoping that you've reflected on, and assuming that you know enough about yourself at this point, and you've taken classes to test it out, and you're exploring internships now and jobs. So when you get, why are you interested in Bank of America? Why are you interested in Eaton Vance? Why are you interested in whatever it is? You need to not think to yourself, well, it was one of 20 jobs I'm applying for right now. You need to actually know what their structure is, what their history is, makeup of different departments. Look them up in LinkedIn, look them up through a Google News alert. Check them out in the Vault. The Vault covers a lot of different companies and also industries, which would be helpful for some of you. So what Dana was just saying, why is such an important thing to be prepared for? And it's not often something that we're given to thinking a lot about, right? We figure out how to solve a problem, what the problem is, and when is it due, kind of thing, right? But now it's really time to reflect. And I think if you take one thing away today, it's research, reflect, and rehearse. 3 R's of interview preparation will keep you on track. And why this role? So knowing if it's an internship, it's a little less about the role, because you don't really know yet, right, what the internship might involve or what it would be supporting or helping. It may be vaguely worded, but hopefully you've done a little bit of background research into the particulars of what the internship's asking for. And so what you could add to that, and envisioning yourself as part of the team. And you can use for, and you may be thinking, I don't know, I haven't worked yet, I've just been in school. That's okay too. You can use for your examples, class projects and teamwork through clubs and activities and things that you've done in high school and since your start at Wellesley. So but be thinking about the functions of the role, the aspects of the company and the field. And it cannot just be, oh, I've heard it pays well, and you know, there's a lot of upward mobility, and so that sounds great, because when you're in an interview, that's going to sound awful. So you really can't just rely on that. And I think, yeah, Vault, let's see what else. Yeah, I think that's it for that slide. We can move on to the next slide.
Great. And this, I would just like to throw in, this is the part where you also do not want to say, I want to work at this company because my friend liked it.
Well, yeah, because you don't want to sound like you're just sort of following what your friend told you. I mean, you can have talked to your friend and found out a lot about the company. That part's fine. But to say, why are you interested in this company, or why are you interested in this role? Well, my friend liked it, and she recommended it to me. So do you have no curiosity on your own? Have you not investigated it on your own? So that would be, part of your answer perhaps is, and additionally, my sister has loved working here or whatever, but you need to have other reasons that you've checked out for yourself and really connected you to the company. That's the really important thing.
Great. Okay. In this little section, we're going to talk about negative questions. These are any questions that have a negative kind of vibe to them. And these are often very unnerving. So I think it's really helpful for people to practice them. I think of them in three categories. The first one is a mistake or a failure, which is allegedly over and done with. That's in the past. The second one is a weakness, which is allegedly still with you. So you have to think about that in the present tense and how you deal with it. And the last one is more of like a problem or an obstacle, can be similar to a mistake or a failure, but something that you had to get over or get through, where that good old STAR method, situation, task, action, result is really helpful. The first thing I would say here is you want to describe whatever situation or weakness it is briefly. I think this question is unnerving, so a lot of people give way too much detail. They get a little nervous. They start saying, well, here was the situation. We had a team of 10 people, and well, one person wasn't very good at their job, but then way too much. So you want to give your listener only what they need to know to understand what you're going to tell them. You want to always focus on the specific lesson that you learned. The other thing that I'll often see people doing when they're describing a mistake or a failure is to say something like, well, so as a result, there was a lot of poor communication and we were not able to finish the project in time. And so we didn't get that client business. And then they have a period at the end of the sentence. And then what do you have hanging in the airspace there? Wow, what a failure. They didn't get the business, or the project was not done on time, or they didn't finish the report. You never want to end there. You want to say, so, our communication channels didn't work well, blah, 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 blah. So we were not able to finish the report on time and did not get the business. But since I've had that experience, what I do differently now is the following, or because of that experience, I have learned to prepare in these ways so that that never happens again. So make sure that the end of the description of the failure or the weakness is not the period of the sentence, but that you go on to say what you learned. If it's a weakness, this can be a little tricky because, I don't know, most people, I think, agree that strengths and weaknesses can be flip sides of the same coin. And sometimes your strength can be terrific, except if you take it to an extreme, or your strength can be good in some situations, but a weakness in another. But again, here, you don't want to end with describing something that's negative. You want to say something like, I'm a very detail focused person, and I think I'm really, really good at editing and noticing errors in things. And so knowing that about myself, I make sure that I plan when I'm working on a project to take some time to step back and get away from the details and look at the big picture and make sure I'm heading in the right direction. So you're acknowledging that you're more of a detail person. That's a real strength. And so you build in time to step back and look at the big picture. You could take it the other way around too and say, I'm a big picture thinker. So I make sure that I connect with colleagues of mine who are really good on the details, just to make sure that I've included everything that I want to include. So with strengths and weaknesses, sometimes you're balancing, and you have to be careful for those ones that are like, oh, I'm too much of a perfectionist, or, oh, I work too hard. I think those have become a little bit
that's too cliche, yeah.
Too cliched and too much of a sort of joke now. So you don't really want to include that. And you're welcome to run your ideas by us and we can help you. Obviously, you don't want to choose something, if you're a salesperson, you don't want to choose the weakness that you really hate meeting new people, if that's what you need to do every day, that doesn't make sense either. Hopefully you wouldn't be choosing that job if that were the case. So,
or needing to meet an externally, motivated goal from someone else, because that's also a lot of sales is externally driven with, here's the goal and you need to meet the quota. So.
Absolutely. Okay, so describe it briefly, focus on the specific lesson you learned, make sure you end the sentence with something very positive, and then really just in that, making sure that you are talking about what you learned, how it's balanced, or actions that you took that improve the situation. Those are some more words around how to focus on the specific lesson learned, because also I hear a lot of times that people will say, so, that project didn't really go very well, but I learned a lot. But you need to say what you learned. You need to be more specific there. So just learned a lot from it is probably not the strongest answer. So we're happy to help you practice those. And that's that section.
And I think just not being vague, I think to have a specific story that you can reveal. You sort of hit on this already, Dana, but we talk a lot about and I don't even remember if we have a slide about this, but STAR and PAR and CAR, which are sort of your structures and your best preparation for an interview, is to come up with a set of stories, like maybe 6 or 7 or 8 different stories throughout your resume, throughout your life, that you can pull when asked a question that you might not exactly have been prepared for, but to know, oh, this is where I'm going to talk about my collaboration strengths, or, oh, this is where I'm going to talk about my competitive edge and how I also have, I'm an athlete, so I have a competitive streak, but I'm a team player. So that's always important. And with the weakness and strength, you don't want to sound something vague like, well, I'm working on, public speaking. You really want to set it up with, here's the situation, here's the task before me, the action I took, and the result. And to Dana's point, make darn sure that result is a positive ending of that story, not a negative ending that doesn't show reflection. So behavior-based questions will make up the bulk of a lot of interviews, where you'll recognize them. It will sound like, tell me about a time when you, or can you give us an example of when you, and it could be overcame an obstacle or a challenge, or can you give us an example of a time when things didn't go the way you'd planned, or tell us about a time when you took initiative and nobody else wanted to follow you. Or can you tell us about a time you had difficulty with a supervisor? Or there are a number of these, right? And what you really, and you can't possibly know every single one that's going to come your way. And this is where that back reflection time, knowing yourself, will come in handy. And the taking literally a STAR worksheet, which is nothing more than just, here's my experience and here are the skills that I take away from that, right? So skills of, so that when you hear, can you tell us about taking initiative? You have, yes, initiative. Here's the story and the action I took and the result I got. So STAR, situation, task, action, result, is the one we typically use. But PAR, I also find helpful. Problem, action, result. Here was the problem. Here was the action I took and the result. Or CAR, challenge, action, result. Or circumstance, action, result, take your pick. So that's how you'll recognize those. And I think it's just critical that you are able to show resilience, creativity, and yet listening skills, following what your boss is asking of you. That's really important. And that's something that typically a supervisor isn't going to want to take time to teach you. So you come in with an example of, well, a couple of years ago, I had a learning opportunity, AKA failure, that I learned from. And moving forward, and this is where you frame it in the positive light, I am now much more prepared and organized and calm before a presentation or what have you, all of that. All right, moving on from behavior-based questions.
So most of you will be hoping to get finance interviews. And typically in your first round interview, you will have the behavioral types of questions that Becky and Dana just shared with you. In your second round interviews, you may get more finance specific questions. And for this, you also are going to have to prepare. Presumably a lot of your classes, your econ classes, a lot of that will have prepared you. But in addition, you might look on, do your own background work. You're going to find that many of them will ask general finance questions. They'll want to know that you basically know how to, what a balance sheet is, an income statement, the cash flow, understand what those things tell a company, what those tools are used for. You'll want to know other terms like EBITDA, which stands for earnings before interest, tax, depreciation, and amortization. It's effectively your net income, and it shows profitability. They're going to test to make sure that you have some basic knowledge for them to work with. You may also get some kind of math problems. A lot of them are effectively word problems. There are a lot of tools you can go on when we are in person. There's a book in career education called Interview Math, which just helps you. They're sort of mental math problems, and most of them are not particularly hard. But again, they're just testing your ability to sort of work under pressure, and your familiarity and dexterity sort of with numbers. You also then, depending on the kind of role that you are looking for, you'll want to dig a little deeper. Depending upon if you're looking at fixed income position, you'll want to know things about inflation. Is inflation, how does inflation, would it affect a commodity trading? So you want to be able to understand the concept of inflation and understand how it might be used in their role. They may ask you questions about the debt market. They may ask, more other specific inflation questions, such as, why did the Feds, set a particular interest rate? So they might check and there's no way to know all of those kinds of questions, as we've said before, but you will want to have sort of a familiarity. Again, always, Juliana was wonderful and provided a bunch of questions that she remembered. Upperclassmen are fantastic in remembering the kinds of questions that they might have been asked for particular roles. So I certainly would reach out to other people who have maybe interviewed for the same position, as well as the internet is a great source. Under corporate banking interview, they'll frequently ask you to walk you through the three basic, the balance sheet, income statement, and cash flow. They may ask you to have a particular company. You may have to have a particular company in mind and tell them about how the cash flow looks on that, or the income statement and balance sheet, what it says about a particular company. So in some cases, you want to have a few in your back pocket, or at least one in your back pocket that you can talk about. They might ask you, tell us whether you would buy or sell, and what you would do differently with their capitalization structure. Again, needing to understand some element of familiarity about it. If you're looking at an investment banking interview, that's where sometimes you can be asked to have a pitch deck. In that case, you won't be surprised. The interviewer will typically tell you, please come prepared with a pitch deck. Again, I would look to upperclassmen. There's plenty on the internet about preparing a pitch deck, but that's typically finding a particular company and telling them why you think you should buy that, why you should invest in that particular company. Venture cap, if you're interviewing for a private equity position, again, there are acronyms and tools that they may want you to know. One is MOIC, which stands for multiple on investment capital. It shows how much value an investment has generated. These are sort of measures or metrics that are commonly used in private equity. So is something called TVPI, or total value paid in multiplier. Gives an insight into a fund's performance by showing total value as a multiple of cost basis. Again, these are very specific, so that if you're interviewing for a specific role, you will want to go back and do some more research and general understanding. They are not expecting you. They will know that if you have no experience in, a previous internship in this, in these areas, they will not expect you to be experts on this by any stretch, but they will have expected you to have some element of familiarity with it so that they know that they have something to work with. Under PE, you may also, another question somebody received was, what is a J curve? And why do you use that kind of analysis? Again, some of these would be from economics, but becoming familiar with them. Did I do venture capital? Venture capital. What should you look for in a company when deciding whether or not to invest in it? Those venture capital ones may be more broad brushed. They may ask you questions about whether you are risk adverse, or are you looking for the next unicorn? I highly suggest that looking for the next unicorn would not be the right answer on that one per se. And they might also ask, what's a typical investment time horizons? So that you sort of understand in general again, sort of broad brush, what that industry, that you have some sense of the background of that industry. In finance, we've also seen a lot of HireVue interviews. You may be familiar with them. Those are the kinds of interviews where you have to tape yourself. There are a couple of tricks to think about them. One, they tend to be sort of a preliminary sort of first round screening process. They can create a lot of anxiety for people. The things that you want to do for that are pretty much the same things you would do for a regular interview. You want to do all the same preparing that Dana and Becky talked about earlier with regard to the company and why you're interested in it. So you want to make sure you're as equally prepared for your HireVue interview as you would be for going into a regular in-person interview or Zoom interview. You want to, a key thing with a hire interview that, similar to an in-person, you want to practice. Here, it's not just practicing with somebody else, but you want to record yourself. You want to see how you come across in the video. Remember, the HireVue recruiters are going to see a gazillion people. You want to make sure that you are presenting yourself in a not a bland way, that you have some good expression, that you have some appropriate hand gestures, not sort of wildly flailing around. You also want to make sure that your facial expressions are positive and engaging. It can be really challenging. Sometimes a trick that I tell people, particularly in the HireVue, is to put a picture of somebody behind your computer or your camera so that you feel like you're talking to a real person as opposed to talking to a blank screen. Some people find that helpful. Before you do your recording, a couple of tips. You want to control your surroundings. You want to make sure you're in a quiet place. You want to do all the same things that Dana mentioned about preparing for any kind of Zoom interview. You want an appropriate background. You want to check your lighting, and you want to make sure your attire is appropriate. So you want to also, a key thing is you want to check your technology before you do your recording. Make sure your computer's plugged in. Everything is working properly. A key thing here is you want to read the instructions. Sometimes we all have a tendency to race through them, particularly when we're anxious. Make sure you read the instructions very carefully. And another key tip, a lot of times they will give you a practice question. Make sure you take the time and run through the practice question. Typically, the way HireVue questions are run, you have 30 seconds to read a question and sort of compose yourself. And then you have about 3 minutes to answer it. Think about how you're going to close your answer. If you run out, if your answer is less than the 3 minutes, figure out whether you're going to stop the recording or how you're going to wrap it up. I think Dana mentioned in talking about the negative pieces, you want to, again, you want to end on a positive note. So whatever the question is, you want to end either tying it back to the role, but ending in some kind of a positive way. And then hit end record. The last thing that frequently finance, the process can be, a first round interview, sometimes a second round interview, and then maybe a super day interview, or maybe the super day is part of the second round interview. Again, upperclassmen are the best to sort of tell you they've walked through what super days are like. So I highly recommend speaking with them, and each company's super day will look slightly different. So that's why speaking with people who have walked through those particular super days is very helpful. In general, you want, again, doing all the preparation work that we talked about. You want to make sure that you practice what you're going to say. You're going to probably say the same thing a lot of times to different people. So you want to have sort of your own pitch, which might be sort of, why are you interested in this company and in this particular role? And have sort of a good answer, that why question. The hard thing about the super days is keeping your energy up. You know, make sure no matter what that you have a really good night's sleep the night before, because you're sort of on for however long this enduring. It's like your interview marathon, and you just have to have your energy level up. You want to come across as normal, but the reality is it takes a lot of energy to smile and be on. And you just want to prepare, make sure you've had a good, the basic things, get a good night's sleep, have a good meal beforehand. And I also think sort of really center yourself. Be prepared to do your homework on the company, all the other basic things. In your mind, it's hard to take in everything, but you want to file away as much information for later as possible. And one of the most important things through all of these interviews, and particularly on super days, is you always want to make sure you follow up. You do not want to forget, your thank you notes, even on super days. My last other thing that I highly recommend everybody do before interviews is, I think, take a moment, 5 minutes before the interview, and center yourself. Have a moment of quiet or meditation to get in touch with your own inner self. I know that I can get anxious, and when I'm anxious, I can get really tight. I can get closed. I don't let my thoughts don't flow as well. Who I am doesn't come across as well. And I genuinely think the more relaxed and in center you are with your own inner self, the better you're going to come across in an interview. If you bring your most authentic self to the interview, then you will have done a great job, and you will let the chips fall where they may. But on that note, I'll turn it over to Becky, who will wrap us up.
Actually, before we leave this slide, I just have one thing to add. I've had a lot of people ask me, well, what if they ask me a word that I just don't know, or if they ask me a question that I simply don't know the answer to? And I think that's that's unlikely to happen if you're, in doing your homework, talking to other people who've had interviews, and it's not likely, but I understand why people would be concerned about that. So I always suggest, and Becky and Christina, you're welcome to jump in here, but I think this is not a question. This is not a question about a situation that you've had or a lesson you learned. This is an actual factual question, or can you explain this term to me, or something like that. And if you don't know it, you can't make it up. So I think the best thing to do in that scenario is say something like, I'm afraid, or something like, I've learned a lot of financial terms in the last year or so. I'm not familiar with that one, but you can be sure that the minute I leave this interview, I will be researching it. And if you say it with a smile on your face, I mean, that's about all you can do. So I throw that out there because it hopefully that's calming. You have an answer if that happens, but it's not likely to happen.
Great point.
Yeah. And I think along the lines of, centering yourself, and what Christina was saying a minute ago, it occurred to me too, that when in person, they're watching you all the time. And now on Zoom, same thing. If you're in a room and it's a group interview, it's helpful that you not just stare at the camera waiting for someone else to begin, but you might even say, and how are you doing today? Or they're looking at how you are with everyone and this goes to when you will be again in person, is how do you greet the person at the front desk? How do you greet they're watching all of that on a super day. So, and in an interview. So that's important as well. And yes, you don't have to be the know-all of everything. You do not need to be the Oracle of Delphi with all answers. but to be able to respond, be agile, and be adaptable is more important. So that's what you want to show. And to Christina's point as well, can't say this enough times, thank you emails, or thank you notes if you want. You can certainly use good old-fashioned note cards too, but very important to acknowledge if it's a panel that all three people in the panel, right? So make sure you have their names spelled correctly, that you've written down. And I looked up, to your wonderful question, and I went home and researched that, or, I've been researching that and discovered, you probably have already read this wonderful article I found from 6 months ago. It shows intellectual curiosity. It shows gumption, follow-up, and that's much more important. And even if you bomb question number 3, you can recover if you close with confidence and poise. So I think that's important.
And after each interview, you want to write down what, if you have a series of them, particularly on Super Days, what jumped out at you from that interview, because you might get confused later in the day. Wait, was that the first person I saw or the second person I saw? So
becomes a
just,
blur.
Yeah, remembering to write down, oh, this person, great description of a day in the life, or good points on trends in the industry, or whatever it might be.
Now, something we didn't really dwell on, but something I want all of you to think about in heading into interviews is, what are you going to ask? There is always going to come that time at the end of the interview where they say, well, thanks, this is really thorough, and we've grilled you on all of these, your weakness, your strength, your this, your that. Now, do you have any questions for us? And you definitely don't want to say, nope, all set. And you also don't want to say, yes, I was just wondering why, some basic question that could be found on the internet or looking at their website. And so a couple of good examples of that might be, well, if I were to start this internship next week, what would be on my to-do list? What would you have as a priority for me to do? It's a good question because, 1, it helps them imagine you already hired in the role. 2, it shows you're ready to hit the ground and you're already thinking about what they might need. You also could ask about their strategic vision, given the year we've just had. How are they adapting? And, that won't be on the website. How are they moving forward? That's helpful. It will tell you a lot about their values, and it helps you match whether that's indeed where you want to be. So those are just a couple quick examples that we can help with lots more. But
I like those 2 examples, Becky, because one is kind of a question about your experience, and the other one is a big picture question about the company. And I think sometimes it's helpful to come up with a few questions from each category. What questions do you all have?
yeah, and what I'm going to do is I am going to stop the recording.